Rockets fans, welcome to the Rockets Launch Pod, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets. Oh! Sports Talk 790. Rockets, Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Rockets Launch Pod starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in to another new episode of the Rockets Launch Pod presented by Clutch Fans. I'm Ben DuBose, he's Paulo Alves. We are your host. And in this final week of July, we've got a special breaking news episode. Pretty atypical because this is usually the quiet period on the NBA calendar. Summer League has come and gone. But within the last few days, there is some actual news, and it could be significant news. The Rockets making what a lot of people think is their most exciting edition of the entire 2026 offseason with the hiring of Chip Engelland. Yes, he's an assistant coach. He's not a player. He's not even a head coach, but it could be that impactful. I see where the optimism is coming from. And we're going to break down all the angles on today's show. I'll start by saying this was not an easy hire to make because Chip had a job with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So if you're going to get a sitting NBA coach to make what amounts to a lateral move in that he's not getting a promotion, it's not like he's going to a better team. In this case, the Thunder were objectively better than the Rockets last season. To get him to make that type of move, it first requires a lot of money. So kudos to Tilman Fertitta for that. You also have to sell your organization as the best fit relative to other teams. Adam Spillane reported that the Utah Jazz were also in the bidding. I suspect with Chip's background, a lot of other teams were as well. So this was definitely not an easy deal for Ime Udoka, Rafael Stone, Tilman Fertitta. All of them had to check certain boxes. They did, and we'll get into all of that today. But I want to start with some initial impressions of what this means for the current team, because I think the way both of us are looking at it, this has the potential to be transformative. Maybe not immediately. There are some timing concerns that we'll get into. The offseason is more than half gone at this point. But let's be blunt. The big concern going into this offseason with the Houston Rockets was shooting above all else. And you're bringing in a guy in Chip Engelland who is known around the league as either the shot doctor or the shot whisperer, depending on who you talk to. He's had amazing testimonials, incredible success stories over the years, worked with players such as SGA, Lou Dort, Josh Giddey with the Thunder. Before that, he was in San Antonio with Kawhi Leonard, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker. All of them developed as shooters under his tutelage, had some incredible testimonials. And by the way, side note, if Kawhi's contract somehow gets voided in the next few weeks, this is yet another connection between the Rockets and Kawhi. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But more importantly, with the Spurs, there was a connection between Chip and Ime because they were assistant coaches together for a few years. Also, before that, Chip was there from 2005 through 2022. He won 2 NBA titles there, and Ime actually had a few years as a player in the late 2000s as well. So those two know each other very well. There does seem to be a cultural fit and alignment. But what it all ultimately boils down to, as I see it, is this. When you combine his unique background and his shooting expertise with this roster, this feels like it could be a big deal. We've talked ad nauseum about the problems when you have 2 non-spacers in Amen Thompson and Alperen Sengun as 2 of your 3 best players. Well, what happens if at least one of them becomes a respectable shooter over the next couple of years? I mean, that can literally change everything. And then you look further down the roster. Think about the role players. Tari Eason, Jabari Smith Jr., they both shot about 36% on threes last season. Imagine if you bumped that to 38 or 39%. Imagine if you bumped Reed Shepherd from 39.5% to 42 or 43. Even just small incremental bumps like those, and you could be talking very differently about their outlooks and what their ceilings are as players. And so in this offseason, where it feels like Rafael Stone and Ime Udoka sort of bet on the status quo, they didn't make any radical changes, they kept the young core in place, the obvious question became, is this young core good enough for that bet to be worthwhile? And I think that's why this hire is so exciting, in that it's a supplemental investment in those young guys, and it gives them every opportunity to succeed. Beyond just the usual buzzwords of time, development, this is something tangibly different that you can point to and sell fans on the idea that next season and future seasons aren't necessarily going to be a repeat of what we just saw. This is change, and it's an attempt to address what basically everybody agrees is perhaps the biggest flaw with the current roster. And as I see it, the final point that I would raise, and then I'll hand things off to you, Paulo, this is also the one move that could have the highest payoff. Because this whole offseason, every time a 40% shooter goes off the board in free agency or via trade, it feels like there's a segment of Rockets Twitter that gets upset and wonders, why didn't the Rockets bring so-and-so in? And beyond the obvious financial and trade considerations, it takes two to tango, and things like that, there's a bigger problem at play. Who are you going to take away minutes from if you're going to play one of those outsiders? You've got Kevin Durant coming back. You've got the 5 young guys that I just mentioned. Marcus Smart is really good. We saw what he did in the playoffs with the Lakers. Fred and Steven Adams are coming back. That's 9 very good players right there. And so inevitably, there's going to be a point of diminishing returns with any quote-unquote shooter you bring in, because it's just not easy to give them a ton of minutes with this team, especially in the super high-leverage situations. Like, this is not a train wreck. This team went 52-30 even with the injuries last year and everything that went wrong. What you want is to keep the strengths of the current team and to add shooting on top of it. You don't want to add shooting but subtract key parts of the formula that made you a good team in a difficult Western Conference to begin with. That's the balancing act. And so whenever Rockets Twitter gets obsessed over a 40% shooter on the board, like say when the Thunder offloaded Isaiah Joe a couple of weeks ago, number one, I'm not sure the Rockets had the trade exception to make that deal happen. But even if they did, the question becomes, who are they going to play in place of? And it's probably going to reach a point of diminishing returns because of what you are subtracting from last year's 52-30 team. If you want to actually contend for a title, the best thing you can do that would improve your chances of winning is to keep the guys you already have, keep the strengths in place, and to have many of them just shoot better and develop. And that's what this Chip Engelland investment is all about. So, Paulo, I'll hand things off to you on that. We were texting the other day. You mentioned that this hire has completely renewed your excitement level for this team. Why is it that an assistant coach, not even a head coach, we're just talking an assistant here, is potentially that important?
Yeah, the most important part is, so this team, I think most people would agree that this team, the biggest question is whether they have that 1A guy, obviously Kevin Durant's that, but I mean for the future, like the young core. Like, can Sengun be the best player in a championship team or even the second best? Can Amen Thompson? Other than that, some people would argue for Reed Shepard, right? But, all of the other guys are pretty much solidified as, okay, these guys are going to be good role players moving forward, pretty safe bets. Which means that the way the Rockets get a 1A guy is by trading for one of them, which costs a lot of assets and leaves you, barren after that, which is not ideal because the Rockets are not necessarily just a 1A guy away, especially considering the players they would have to keep up. Or they have to draft one, or they have to sign one in free agency. And the Rockets are not going to have free cap space for a while, so they would have to get maybe an Nickeil Alexander Walker type of situation, in which you sign a guy for the MLE, but he's actually a max guy you never knew. I mean, not that he's a max guy, but the same principle. Jalen Brunson type's an easier one. And so that's where Chip comes in, right? Because it's a lot easier to imagine Sengun being a 1A type of guy if he's got a deadly jump shot. It's way easier to imagine Amen Thompson as a 1A guy if he has a competent jump shot. Like Sengun, if you see that, you start seeing a little bit of Karl Anthony Towns there, right? for a man, that would be a pretty unprecedented player. Like Amen Thompson's athletic profile and defense and plus playmaking coupled with a jump shot, and you can only imagine how much space it would leave in the like it would open up for him in the paint if teams had to respect his jump shot. Like it would just be insane. And so like knowing that that's our biggest weakness and knowing that that's the way you unlock from in-house a possible 1A superstar type of guy, the best thing you can do is hire the best guy out there when it comes to teaching, players how to shoot. Chip is 65 years old, but listen, shooting mechanics are the same thing, or mostly the same thing for the last 30 years. Like guys shoot like okay, there's been a little bit of a revolution in terms of one motion jump shots versus two motion, but for the most part, right? Like if you could teach someone how to shoot in the 90s, you can teach someone how to shoot in the 2020s, and you don't even need to speculate too much on that. When you look at Chip and the impact he had on the Thunder, obviously you're not going to expect the guy like he has his miracle work type of players like Kawhi Leonard. Like Kawhi was not a shooter at all. Boardman gets paid. Obviously, Kane comes from a guy that can't shoot. And then you have Lou Dort as well, who was, absolutely a liability shooting both on volume and on percentage. And then, both of those guys became, had 40% shooting seasons after working with Chip, right? But then, if you want to just talk about numbers, I put together a little tweet about it. SGA went from 35% on all volume to 37%. His free throw percentage, which is another thing that Chip does help in Houston, and is a problem for Houston. Not as much last season as it was in seasons prior, but still very much a big problem. SGA went from an 81% free throw shooter to an 89% free throw shooter after him on basically the same volume, so it's not like, that's what changed. Lou Dort went from a 33% career shooter before Chip to a 37% career shooter post Chip. All of these numbers are the average before he joined the Thunder versus the average after he joined the Thunder.
And by the way, I don't understand the narrative I've seen from a few Thunder fans, and I'm guessing it's just a cope, but that Chip did harm to Chet Holmgren, who struggled in the playoffs. If you look at the data for Chet, he actually this past season had the highest shooting percentage of his career at 55.7%. His three-point shooting from year to year has been very level, 37% as a rookie, 37.9 in year two, 36.2 in year three, so a very slight dip. Of course, Chet's year three is analogous to Jabari's year four because Chet had what amounts to a medical redshirt year when they were both rookies in 2021 to 22. And then in the playoffs, Chet actually went from shooting 26% in 24, 29.7% from three in their title season of 25 to 35.7% in this year's playoffs and almost 57% overall. So I don't know where the criticisms of Chip Engelland for Chet Holmgren's underwhelming playoff series against the Spurs. Quite frankly, it just felt like Chet was afraid to shoot against Wemby. He got in his own head, and somehow Thunder fans are trying to connect that to Chet Holmgren or to Chip, and I don't understand that at all.
Yeah, 100%. And just to put a bow on it, a couple more stats. Isaiah Joe, a sharp shooter, shot 35% before Chip Engelland to 42% after. Aaron Wiggins was a 31% three-point shooter before Chip joined OKC, turned into a 39% to an 8% increase. And Kenrich Williams, more of a vet guy, went from 35 to 39% after. And these are not single seasons, right? I want people to realize this is the average that these guys shot before he joined OKC for their careers up to that point, and the average of what they shot from the moment Chip joined onwards. So, for example, Lou Dort in the last three seasons has had two 40% three-point shooting seasons, but then he dipped again this last season, and that's factored in. That's why it's 37% for him and not 40. But obviously, just from like everybody, like we know who Lou Dort is, and that's a major accomplishment on its own. So this to say, like, yes, Chip's been doing it for a really long time. Yes, he is 65 years old at this point, but the results on his last stop are there for anybody to see. And then everybody remembers, the Tony Parker example, the the Kawhi Leonard example. Like, this is the guy who gave Kawhi Leonard a jump shot, and the jump shot is today Kawhi Leonard's biggest weapon, and the thing that he does at just an unparalleled level. Like, you just can't guard Kawhi on middies or 3-point shooting.
Rockets legend Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah, what could have been.
What still could be.
What could
I digress.
Yeah, but like, if he gets a man Thompson, and it's really interesting because for a man in specific, there's a very good control. Like, in 3 years, you look at a man's jump shot and you look at Osar's jump shot, and you see the difference. And we'll see what that difference is. So, it will be a good control to see the work Chip puts in, how much of a difference it makes. But just on the grand scheme of things, right? Like, if a man Thompson becomes a 36% 3-point shooter on 4 or 5 attempts a game, that's completely transformative for what he is as a player. Like, to me, like, current Amen Thompson with that jump shot is probably a top 15 player in the league. Maybe better, depending on how that influences his ability to drive and finish at the rim and generate his own jump shot. When you have LeBron's commentary that Dave McMenamin reported on ESPN, that after one of Amen Thompson's playoff games against LeBron, like, LeBron turned to Marcus Smart and said, "Man, if Amen Thompson gets a 12-footer, like, it's over, right? So a reliable 12-footer, it's over." So imagine that maximized to a 3-point shot. It's just, this is the most transforming thing they could do without giving up major assets, I think, by far. Barring a start, like, I think this would rank higher than maybe some start rates. Like, I would rather this. I mean, this is not a good example because I didn't want to trade for Giannis in the first place. But I think this could be more impactful for the team than a Jaylen Brown trade, for example. More positively impactful. It's just, we had a pod like a few months ago where we said that perhaps the thing you could point towards the most with this front office and this regime was the lack of player development. Well, this is going all in basically the most sought after player development guy in the league. And so, like, it's that big, and it's for the team that struggles the most with shooting. Obviously you have, obviously the percentages last year weren't awful, but the reason why the Rockets seem like they can shoot is, well, because two of their main players getting minutes in Şengün and Amen can't shoot, and after that, it's because even though the percentages will look okay, like 36% for Tarisin is okay, 37% for Jabari is okay, it's that they go on large stretches, like Tarisin in particular, where he was red hot and then he couldn't hit anything for an entire month. And that's another thing that Chip helps with, right? Getting guys out of funks is another thing that he's known for. It's not just reworking jump shots. And so it's just, you are affecting basically every player on the team and making better, hopefully, their worst trait. Because besides Reed Shepard, shooting's probably the worst trait for most of these guys of the main things that you want them to do. And so it's just, to me, it makes me a lot more excited to watch the season unfold, because what made me be kind of on the lower end of excitement for the season is, well, can you really reasonably expect a breakthrough outlier development from Amen Thompson or Alperen Şengün at this point? Maybe, but this makes it a whole lot more likely. But you were always grasping at straws on that, and so basically any other development there, other than Reed Shepard, becoming a bona fide star, is not going to really move the needle too much. Now this gets me excited because to me the path for this team to become a championship contender is, Amen Thompson gets a jump shot and you build around him, and if Amen Thompson gets a jump shot, building around him may mean keeping up on Şengün as well, because they have good chemistry if the spacing wasn't that terrible. It's just like massive props to decision making on, God can imagine how expensive this is. Like, I don't think Chip was a free agent. They had to go and get him from the Thunder, so they have to pay more than what the Thunder are currently paying him. They have to beat probably the rest of the league, because I guarantee you there's not a single team in the league that would say no to Chip Engelland right now if he wanted to go coach there. So, I think it's going to be one of those things where, front office decided, hey, we're getting this guy and we're not going to allow him to say no to us. And you can only do that if you have full green light from ownership to go spend whatever it takes, right? And coaching is the spot where you can spend whatever it takes and have no cap implications, and you're not damaging your future by doing so. And when it comes to that, the Rockets got Ime Udoka, who is on a very large salary for a long time, one of the best coaches in the league, whether people like him or not, because they don't whatever. We had a bad season, everybody hates the coach. Normal. Then they got Ben Sullivan, who at the time was someone who was really sought after. The Rockets went and got him. They still have Ivy, who
Continues to get head coaching interviews.
Exactly, that's what I meant. And now they went and got literally the most sought after assistant in the league. Like it or not, like if you don't want to call it assistant, like the most sought after player development guy in the league for the last God knows how many years. Like it's not easy to make a name for yourself as a player development guy in this league. How many others can you remember off the top of your head? Most of them have Instagram accounts and have catchy names like Lethal Shooter or whatever it might be, and they're more of a gimmick than really anything else. At least you hear and you see videos of your players working out with them, but then it never kind of really ever does anything. Don't want to shit on those guys. Make a living however you want to make it. But this is a guy that is sought after by every team in the league because of what he does and how well he does it. And so I'm really, really excited. And the returns will probably not be there year one. It might take a couple of years. But adding a competent jump shot to our best players is so, I guess, paradigm shifting that you wait whatever you want, whatever you need to wait, because if that does, pay off, even if you couldn't build around them, even as trade assets, these guys will be worth a lot more. And so, if you are a big Amen Thompson fan, which I know the Rockets front office is, what's the main obstacle for him. And the Rockets got the best guy available. Well, the best guy that wasn't even available to come and work on that and make that obstacle as small as it can possibly be. And if that doesn't get you excited, I mean, like to me, this is the equivalent of getting, like this might have the same impact that getting pick 2 in 2021 had. It might be that big of a difference, because Amen Thompson without a jump shot is probably always going to be more of a role player plus guy. Amen Thompson with a jump shot grows from that to probably a top 15 player in the league, and the return out of a top 2 pick in the draft, what you hope is that you can get a top 20. Like if you get a top 20 player in the league with pick 2, you're really, really happy. So yeah, like it has the potential to be that big. And it's not like, this is like, I know some people said this, and I'm sorry, I know I'm going wrong, but this is not, full respect to Ben Sullivan, this is not Ben Sullivan. This is the best guy out there for the last 30 years. He has always been the best guy out there for the exact thing we need the most. Like, this is a major free agency acquisition to me. Like, the difference between Chip Engelland and your next best shooting coach is probably bigger than the difference from Ime Udoka to Frank Vogel, for example. I think it's that big because of the impact it has on our team in specific, which struggles so much with spacing and probably more than any other team in the league. So yeah, like this is absolutely massive deal, and I can't wait to see how this pans out. Like it might be that it's unfixable. It might be that the solution for Amen Thompson's jump shot is don't shoot. But you'll know after 3 years with Chip Engelland, because if he can't do it, nobody can.
Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge we don't 100% know the status of his contract with Oklahoma City, but even if it was up after this past season, I think it goes without saying they would have had interest and did have interest in retaining him. So regardless of whether his contract was up, he basically had an offer in hand because they did not want to lose the guy. They have talked at length the last few years, the players and people throughout the organization, about what he's meant to them. As you laid out, he's one of the most accomplished, maybe the most accomplished shooting coach in the history of the NBA. He's been a contributor to 3 different title teams. So the Thunder were definitely in the bidding here. So were other teams. I want to address a couple of the devil's advocate arguments that I've seen out there. I do think there's a little bit of validity, but overall, it's still certainly worth the bet, especially when considering the Rockets' position as you just laid out. So one argument I've seen is that if it was this simple and it was guaranteed to pay dividends at the amount we're hoping for, then why wouldn't other teams have been willing to bid this aggressively? Why wouldn't he be in the tens of millions of dollars based on what it would mean for the team and maxing out the players? I think this is a uniquely impactful spot potentially for Chip Engelland in that the Rockets have not just quality, but quantity. When you look at their young players, there are several recent first-round picks, all in their formative years, 25 years or younger. So these are the people who are potentially most impacted and can most easily be molded if we're talking about their shot mechanics, perhaps similar to when he left the Spurs for the Thunder in 22. The Thunder in 22 were clearly about to begin their ascent to the top of the Western Conference. They had that talent base in place. And so Chip was the logical next guy to help so many of those young players develop. You've got potentially a similar setup. I don't want to say that the talent in Houston's current young core is comparable to what the Thunder had before they began their recent rise, but I do think, at least in terms of quantity, there are a number of young players who could potentially benefit from his tutelage on a daily basis. And so I think to get the most bang for your buck with Chip Engelland, I think you need a lot of young players. And to make sense for Chip Engelland, you also need to be able to compete in the near term because, as you mentioned, he's 65 years old. He's not going to be around forever. So not that many teams have both a number of young players, and by the way, young players in need of shooting help. You know, there are some teams that have young players, but they're already good at shooting. So maybe it's not as great of a fit. In Houston, it checks all the boxes. There's a number of young players. Most need help with shooting, maybe all. And the team is good enough already to where they are going to be relevant. And it's not like a 65-year-old Chip Engelland is just playing out his remaining NBA coaching years on a team that's not relevant. And thus, why would he leave a bona fide contender like the Thunder? It had to check a lot of boxes. So for those asking, you know, why wouldn't other teams be willing to invest? I think they probably were. It was the perfect storm, and it had to make sense for both sides. And clearly the Rockets had the need, but I think it also makes sense for Chip as well. That's a marriage that makes sense. And the cherry on top is that he does know Ime Udoka. They worked together all those years in San Antonio, and so I think there's a cultural fit as well. The other thing I want to address, which is how much will it pay off next season? Yeah, as you said, Paulo, like we should probably keep expectations in check because the offseason is already over halfway complete. And so when you get to training camp, you get to the preseason, you get to the regular season, and there's games almost every other day, it's tough to make significant changes at that time. Like when players go through more transformative shifts in regards to their shot mechanics or anything that's radically different, it typically happens in the off season because you need to build up muscle memory, or else you're just going to revert back to your previous habits when you get in a game situation and there aren't that many practices. So yeah, it is fair to wonder with the off season over half gone And a lot of the players haven't even reported to Houston yet. We know this week Rafael Stone and I think some coaches are in Turkey with Alperen Şengün right now. Just how much can he do year one? The rebuttal to that would be, it's not all about year one. Even with Kevin Durant, I know a lot of folks see a 38-year-old Kevin Durant, and it's all about maximizing whatever he has left in his all-NBA prime. As we've said plenty of times, that's never been the perspective of the Rockets themselves. So they're okay if this is a slow build and it takes a little bit of time. But secondly, it's not all about Amin Thompson and Alperen Şengün. And even with those two, maybe Amin never comes along from three-point range, but maybe he can develop that 12-footer to LeBron's point. There's nuance in there. And so it's not can they or can't they. Maybe they can develop in certain areas. But even if you want to look at those two and say there's a lot more work that needs to be done relative to the others, and can they get to a point where they are respected as spacers this upcoming season? I don't know. That's a fair question. However, the other three, Reed, Tari, and Jabari, they are already starting from a fairly high baseline. And so if we're talking going from good to very good, with Jabari and Tari going from 36 to 38 or 39, or from very good to elite, in Reed's case, going from about 39.5 to hopefully 42 or 43, that's not impossible. I think that's, you shouldn't expect it, but it's not out of the realm of possibility by any means, especially because I do think with Chip, who's known around the league as maybe the best individual shooting coach in NBA history, in some ways, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you look at the guys he's helped in the past, and you're Reed Shepherd, Jabari Smith, or Tari Eason, let's use one of these guys that's already shown some shooting ability to this point, how can you not think, why not me? Why can't I have a breakthrough of my own? Why shouldn't I have a breakthrough of my own now that the organization has made this investment in me and my development? Some of it, even if he doesn't necessarily have some crazy secret sauce from a technique perspective relative to Ben Sullivan, who's sort of been the Rockets shooting guru the last few seasons, even if there's no radical technique that Chip Engelland is going to have any of these guys start using once they report to training camp in September, just the belief, just the confidence that comes from working every day with one of the all-time greats at what he does, that mentality bump, that might be enough to bump you a couple extra percentage points to where you go from good to very good, or very good to elite. Like, mentality is a big part of sports, and part of the reason you make this type of investment is in the message that it sends, certainly to the fan base. There's a reason we're excited, but also to the players. I think it potentially gives them a shot in the arm as well. And that's the kind of thing that even in year one, even if he hasn't had a chance to fully make some of the more, radical changes if he deems them necessary, I do think that shot in the arm factor is something that could pay dividends this upcoming season, especially with guys like Jabari and Tari and Reed that aren't starting from square one. So I just think, the devil's advocate arguments that I've seen out there, it's not that there's nothing to them, but I do think that there's a pretty easy rebuttal in a way that you could easily justify the investment from a Rockets perspective, even if it doesn't, year one, pay the championship dividends that we all want. Now, speaking of the investment, I want to turn our attention to Tilman Fertitta, because that's what might be the most encouraging part of all, what it says about the ownership of this team. Because good ownership can be one of the biggest competitive advantages in sports. And even if it was understandable, the Rockets did give up some second-round picks to offload the Dorian Finney-Smith contract earlier this month for strictly financial reasons. Like, there are no team-building penalties from the repeater tax. It's very punitive, but Tilman is not made of money. None of these guys are. And so, yes, they did make a move that cost them assets, not significant assets, but assets nonetheless, to save money. And so it's fair to note that. And then to have that immediately followed up by this, it shows you that the DFS situation, for a few reasons, as we laid out in one of our recent shows, was in fact an outlier. There were reasons to delay the repeater tax. There were reasons to think that the chance of him turning it around as a player, as an asset, was almost nothing. And so later the same month, to have an investment that was not required at all of this significance, it shows you that all the recent things that have been happening with the Rockets the last few years, we've talked about the encouraging signs from Tilman as an owner, going all the way back to, not meddling, letting Rafael and Patrick and to some extent Ime run the show, and investing in the practice facility, the WNBA team, doing all the little things around the margins, buying draft picks. There's been lots of little signs from Tilman that suggest that he gets it, and we don't need to get into the particulars today. But I do think after a move that, I know the repeater tax is harsh, it's very punitive, but that was a dump that wasn't for team building reasons. It was to save money, the DFS trade. You have it immediately followed up by a deal of this magnitude. I do think that it speaks well that everything we've noticed in recent years, it still holds. Tilman Fertitta gets it, and he is willing to invest heavily. And I think that's something that it should have fans feeling good. And also, that's another shot in the arm to the players. When you see your owner go out there and spend when he doesn't have to, that's a big deal, right?
%, right? I think there is a very big distinction from Tilman cost-saving moves in the James Harden era that cost first-round picks, that cost us tradable salary, that to what they did this season in dodging the luxury tax. Like, back then, they were dodging the first year of luxury tax. This time around, or back then, with a bona fide contender that was ready to, try and win a championship right there and then, that's inexcusable. This time around, they have a team that's an up-and-coming team, is not quite a contender yet. Just had a year that showed us that there is some growth that needs to be, made, and they dumped a guy that was a mistake to sign, right? That there's no expectation that, he got immediately bought out when he got to Charlotte. There's no expectation that he's going to be good. You could make the argument that they could have kept him as salary filler, but then again, like, this team's pretty deep. Like, they can easily go 10 guys deep, 11 guys deep, and dodging the tax now helps you be able to pay it when this team is planned to be full throttle contending, when they have no other choice, with a Man Thompson extension, and Chingun extension, and Jabari and Tari, and whoever star they end up bringing them at that time. It, for the cost versus the incentive, it made sense objectively to do it because, well, yes, you could expect Steve Ballmer to pay the tax, repeat the tax forever. The average NBA owner, like, I think what a sensible line is, you should expect the owner of your team to pay tax. You should not expect the owner of your team to pay repeater tax, because very few do. And those that do are just the uber rich that they don't even care, right? Repeater tax is when it gets absolutely ridiculous. And the Rockets, by making the cost-cutting move this season, got rid of what was perhaps a mistake last season of going into the tax for a team that wasn't good enough because of the injuries, obviously, but, with hindsight, it's 2020. Now, every other thing that the Rockets have done since this rebuild started has pointed in the opposite direction. Taking on salary when they were, like, being one of the highest payroll teams without being a tax team, while rebuilding, while the Thunder were below the minimum, the cap minimum threshold. Taking on salary dumps for second round picks, like I think it was Sekou Doumbia or something back then. I remember there were a couple of cases of that. Buying a second round pick in KJ Martin for I think it was $5 million at the time in cash considerations. And now, not looking at the money when signing Ime Udoka and his coaching staff, and on renewing that contract, and now getting the best, the most sought after assistant in the league. I think Tilman I think, this is just projection. Like, this is my opinion. I don't have any insight on this, but it felt like with Morey, Tilman probably didn't like. Well, I think his financial situation was worse at the time, but I also think maybe he didn't trust the brain trust at the time. They weren't like his people making these decisions, and maybe he didn't trust them then. I don't know. I don't know how much of this is Patrick being involved nowadays in being able to smooth things over a little bit. But it has felt that ever since the Omori is gone, like that has not been a concern at all. And that makes me happy because, as you said, like, just look at the Portland Trailblazers, right?
Yep.
Having cheap ownership can very much, hamstring you when in trying to build a contender. And the NBA has very few ways in which you can spend unlimited amounts of money. One of them is coaching. And the fact that the Rockets have heavily invested into that goes to show that the ownership is not cheap. I mean, the Blazers were going to sign Thiago Splitter, a first-time head coach, and wanted to pay him so little money that he turned down being a first-time head coach because it was that insulting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they fired a 15-year, 20-year, 10-year play-by-play or one of the broadcasters, one of the voices of the Blazers, because he wanted to be paid as such. Like, we're very far from the extreme. I think Tilman got a bad reputation, deservedly so, early on. I think he's done more than enough to wash that away. And if you ask me, like let's say the Rockets are, 15 wins over 500 going into the deadline or something like that, and an opportunity shakes free where they can trade for a superstar that makes sense, but it involves paying like a large amount of tax or getting right up to the second apron. I'd be confident in saying that they would. And that's more than I could say within the James Harden years. And I think that that's what's reasonable as a fan to expect out of the ownership of the team. So yeah, I think this is another and perhaps the biggest proof that ownership has given that they're willing to spend on this team and give this team the best chance that it can. Because I am like, obviously I don't have access to the contracts. I don't know if you do. I don't think you do either. But it cannot have been cheap.
No.
Sign the best shooting coach in the league when everybody knows that that's a crucial part of development for young players.
And I want to close out the pod looking at Ime Udoka, both his role in getting this deal to the finish line as well as what the finality of it says about Ime. So in terms of how we got here, I don't think he was intentionally lying at the end of season media availability when he was asked if he anticipated changes to the Rockets coaching staff, and he said no. I think it's a classic situation in which it's conditional. If you would have told him that Chip Engelland, a guy he trusts implicitly from those years in San Antonio and is known around the NBA as one of the best shooting coaches of all time with a roster that needs shooting development, if you had told Ime that he would be available and the Rockets would have at or close to the top bid, by the way, I was told that to close the loop on Tilman Fertitta, the phone call to get him to sign off took less than 30 seconds. Like, he didn't even make them sweat. The way the Rockets structure works, Rafael or Patrick, whoever it is, has to make a call to get Tilman to sign off since he is cutting the checks. He did not fight them at all. He was sold. He knows what the deficiencies are on this team. I'm guessing he knows Chip Engelland over his years in the NBA, and this was a deal that Tilman was not only okay with, he is excited about. But in terms of going from the press conference to a deal with Chip Engelland, how did we get from that end of season availability to today? I think if Ime had known at the time that Chip would be available, that the Rockets would have close to the top bid, that the Thunder wouldn't be investing heavily to bring him back. And who knows, maybe the Thunder invest more heavily if they win a second consecutive title and it's tougher for him to walk away. I mean, there's a lot of things that all had to line up. And by the way, the Thunder, as evidenced by Isaiah Joe, Lou Dort, now Engelland, they've got some of their own tax concerns. So just as the tax took away a couple of draft assets in the DFS deal from the Rockets. Now the tax is giving the Rockets potentially because they're taking advantage of the Thunder cutting cost. If you had told Ime Udoka that Chip Engelland would be available and he felt confident that that deal would be reached, then yeah, I think he would have left the door more open. But he wasn't sure. And he wasn't so desperate that he wanted to do a deal no matter what. And so if you're not certain, you're always going to say that the status quo is acceptable. The last thing you want to do, if you pride yourself on negotiating, and the Rockets clearly do, look at all these contracts. The last thing you want to do is commit yourself to a position before the deal is lined up. You're in a terrible spot potentially for leverage purposes, as well as the awkward scenario where if the deal doesn't get to the finish line, then are the players feeling let down because you led them to believe there would be a change and then there's not? Is it awkward with the other coaches? I mean, there's so many variables there. It reminds me a lot of, last year, Rafael Stone, when he was asked at the end of season availability after the Warriors series about Jalen Green and the lineup data, and he pushed back, and people wondered, how could he not see this? Well, a month later, Jalen Green is traded to Phoenix in the Kevin Durant trade, and it's not just to get Kevin Durant. I've been told, and I've reported it previously on this podcast, the Rockets had some concerns with how Jalen's contract was going to age. So Rafael saw many of the same things. He just wasn't going to say it on a podium in front of the world to see before a deal is done. It puts them in a terrible leverage position with any other teams or agents, and it potentially puts them in an awful situation with Jalen if you try and bring Jalen back into the fold because a deal isn't there. There's no reason to put yourself in a terrible position like that unnecessarily just because fans want heads to roll. I understand why the questions will be asked, and I don't think they go up there like trying to lie. I think in a perfect world, they'd be transparent. I do think they try and leave us some breadcrumbs, but they're not going to box themselves in unnecessarily. That's just the way these press conferences work. You shouldn't take any of them at 100% face value as gospel. So I do think they were open even back then if the right guy came available to upgrading this staff. They just didn't know if and when that guy would come available. So in that scenario, you express confidence in the status quo, and if the situation changes at a later date, it changes at a later date. You treat it as a welcome surprise. Last year, it led to the KD trade. This year, it's Chip Engelland. So I don't think Ime was lying. I don't think anything necessarily changed other than just the right guy came available at the right time and Tilman Fertitta cut the check. The other part of this, I do think it speaks well to Ime recognizing the need, and he's talked about wanting to improve the shooting. He's not blind. But I also think just as much as Ime picked Chip Engelland and believed in him as the fit, Chip Engelland picked Ime. As we've mentioned a few times, Chip is 65 years old. He's not going to a spot in which he thinks the coach is potentially a lame duck or that it's a bad situation. It has to check a few boxes. So for Chip to pick the Rockets and Ime Udoka, it shows you that he's comfortable certainly with Ime as a person, but also that he believes in this team. And given the success of Chip Engelland around the league, I think that validation means a lot. It shows you that I know the fan base is down after one bad year, but around the NBA, the perception of Ime Udoka is still quite strong. The Knicks just won a title with Mike Brown leading the way. Who was their first pick to be coach before turning to Mike Brown? Ime Udoka. That's how liked he is and valued he is around the NBA. I know this was a bad season in which almost everything went wrong. It's just one season, and they still went 52-30. So I think for Chip Engelland at his age to pick the Rockets, and it's not just a one-year deal, this is about a partnership for the years ahead and the development of that young core, shows you a degree of confidence, and it shows you that there is another argument that, hey, there are plenty of qualified people around the NBA that believe in Ime Udoka and believe in what the Rockets are building, even if fans on social media and message boards, some of them don't at the moment. I can't promise you that Chip and the other side, so to speak, is going to be right, but I do think it's worth noting that an other side does in fact exist. So just as much as I think Ime was willing to bide his time and did the right negotiating thing to wait for Chip to come available, it's also worth noting that Chip picked Ime as well. All right, and with that, I think we're actually going to bring this episode to a close. Paulo's connection dropped off. It's after 1 a.m. Portugal time that we're recording this, and he says he largely agrees. So there's no point in asking him to come back to echo the points that were just made. I'll let him go to bed and let you have a little bit more time back in your days as well, speaking to you out there listening. So with that, we'll put a bow on this one. We will be back soon with more because Chip Engelland is not the only deal the Rockets have reached in recent days. At the end of last week, they announced deals with Isaiah Crawford, the 4-year Hinkie special, although none of that is guaranteed just yet. Jae'Sean Tate on a 1-year minimum deal that's only about a third guaranteed. And then Oscar Tshiebwe, big man out of Kentucky, who most recently played with the Utah Jazz, and Julian Phillips, a very athletic 6'8" wing player who was with the Bulls and the Timberwolves last season. Both Tshiebwe and Phillips were signed to non-guaranteed deals. They could earn a roster spot out of training camp, or they could potentially be two-way candidates. I believe they both have two-way eligibility remaining. We'll talk about those guys in future shows. One, because we are about to enter the dead period of the NBA offseason. So we will need filler content in the near future. Secondly, we have talked about Crawford in recent shows. He was great in Summer League. The Hinkie special is very similar to the deal they gave to Bruce Thornton, the second-round pick. So not a lot of downside, a lot of upside. It makes sense with what we've seen thus far. But then the other piece is that there could be more deals still to come. What I think a lot of people forget about this time of year in the NBA is that your offseason rosters can be up to 21 players. And so while the Rockets, they do want to stay below the luxury tax line for reasons that we've laid out, including earlier today, if they're giving out non-guaranteed deals and Exhibit 10 contracts, there's no reason why they shouldn't go all the way to 21 players. If for nothing else, just have more guys to evaluate. Some of them can be candidates for the Vipers, your G League affiliate. It gives you 4 groups of 5 potentially in training camp. Well, 4 groups of 5 and then 1 if you go to 21. And then you don't have to be back down to the regular season limit, which is up to 15 standard contracts and 3 two-ways until the night before the regular season opens, usually around October 20th. I don't think the NBA has announced it just yet. But the point is that while it may seem like the roster is full, I don't think the Rockets are done. They're not to 21. So there may be some other guys. I don't think it'll be any guaranteed money because the Rockets are right up to the luxury tax line. In a perfect world, they would stay below it. But there are going to be, in my opinion, some other signings along the lines of Oscar Tshiebwe and Julian Phillips, guys who could be candidates for, two-way deals. Maybe they have a great camp and they earn a standard spot. Maybe they become candidates for the Rio Grande Valley Vipers down the line. I do think there will be more bodies, more flyers near the end of the depth chart. And so once we get a more complete puzzle and we know what it's going to look like, we'll do a deeper dive into those final spots on the roster and what some of the most important battles at training camp could be. J.D. Davison's in the mix as well on a non-guaranteed deal that the Rockets gave him at the end of last season, although I think he's a little bit lower than Isaiah Crawford in the hierarchy right now, simply because the Rockets brought in so many guards this offseason, most notably Bruce Thornton, who had a very encouraging summer league. Anyway, we'll talk more about players in episodes to come. I wanted this episode to be quick hitting, at least by our standards. We are long-winded, but I wanted this to be our Chip Engelland extravaganza, where we do a deep dive into what it means for the team, what it says about Tilman Fertitta and Ime Udoka, a little bit about Rafael Stone as well. And we'll save the roster breakdowns for future shows. Just stay tuned, because if you're a regular listener of this pod, you know we don't go dormant for very long, even in the so-called dead period of the NBA calendar. So we will have more content in the near future to talk about the roster. Also, I believe we're about a couple of weeks out from when the NBA releases its schedule. That's usually around August 10th to 15th that week. Maybe it's a little bit later this year because, as Adam Silver, commissioner of the league, spelled out, they were delayed in putting together their national TV slate because they wanted to know where LeBron James was going to sign, and he didn't announce that until this past Friday. He's going to Philadelphia. So now the national partners are scrambling to get as many 76ers games on the docket as they can. So maybe that pushes back the usual August 10th to 15th schedule release week to something closer to the 20th. I don't know that. It wouldn't surprise me, but it is coming. Just might be slightly delayed this year based on the LeBron factor. Anyway, this is it for today. And if you want more content before our August episodes, which are to come in the not too distant future, the best place to hear from me or Paulo is on social media. My handle is at Ben DuBose. Paulo is at Paulo Alves NBA. And if you go to LaunchPod790 on Twitter/X, that's the homepage for this podcast. If you go to the link tree in that bio, that's got all the links you need to support us and this show, our friends, partners, and sponsors, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Clutch Fans, the Clutch Fans YouTube channel, Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of the team. We use their infrastructure to send this show out. We appreciate all of them. And if you want to show some support to us, the best way you can do that beyond engaging with us and following us is to show some love to those friends, partners, and sponsors. All right, with the plugs complete, we'll adjourn for today. Or actually, one more plug. If you have not subscribed to this podcast on your podcast home of choice, please do, be it Apple, YouTube, Spotify, whatever it is. Subscribe, leave a positive review. That's how we can keep looking good to those friends, partners, and sponsors and keep this program running as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. All right, with that, the plugs are complete. On behalf of Paulo Alves, I'm Ben DuBose. As always, we appreciate you guys and girls so much for listening, and please come back soon for more new episodes of the Rockets Launch Pod presented by Clutch Fans.